Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. I'm Ian Lesser from GMF here in Brussels, and welcome back to day 3 of Brussels Forum. I hope you all had a very good evening last night. A couple of words of welcome and a little bit of housekeeping and a little bit of substance. This morning we're very, very pleased to welcome the young professional leaders to the group with us here. We're delighted that they're joining us. We have set a speaker lineup for the mystery session that we decided on yesterday. And just to remind you, the mystery session that you chose, I should say, is soft power strikes out, hard power strikes back. And the speakers that we will have for that a little later today are General John Allen, Distinguished Fellow at the Brookings Institution, Gitte Lillian Beck, Public Affairs Manager of Advice, Masafumi Ishii, Director General of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Japan, and Alex Rondos, EU Special Representative for the Horn of Africa. So that promises to be very, very, very exciting. One more word of housekeeping. If you have a borrowed Spot Me device and you're leaving today, please return it to us. I was told that was the most important thing to say. Before we introduce the next session, or actually by way of introduction for it, I just wanted to say a few words about the theme and a little bit about what GMF is planning to do this year around this theme. The theme, as you know, is Europe's stake in American strategy. And I would just make 3 points about this very briefly. The first is that we started this Brussels Forum with a discussion that was very much reflecting on history. And there are many anniversaries. There is no shortage of debate about a US pivot to Asia, and there are many reasons to take that seriously. But I think we should also remind ourselves that 2014 is also the 100th anniversary of a very, very important American pivot to Europe, which has been very consequential in security terms and obviously takes on new meaning in the context of what's happening these days. We may not have 400,000 troops in Europe anymore, but the US is still a key European security actor, and this next session is going to discuss where that presence and engagement is going. We're going to do a lot on that as GMF this year. We always do, but we're certainly going to reinforce our work on security issues because they're so important this year as always. The second point I'd make is that sitting here in Brussels, it's very obvious that 2014 is also a very critical year of decision and leadership change in Brussels, in the EU institutions, in NATO, and of course next week President Obama is going to visit Brussels for the first time since taking office. Crisis management will be on the agenda, but also some very big questions of strategy for the future. We, in our own work here in Brussels, but also throughout the GMF network in Washington and elsewhere, will be taking up some of those big issues in our writing and in our discussions and convening, and I hope you can be part of those. And finally, I would say that I would just remind us that public opinion is part of this equation. Many of you will be familiar with our Transatlantic Trends Survey. For over a decade, we've been charting European and American attitudes towards critical issues, including security, questions of trust and leadership, attitudes towards defense budgets and other things. The next edition of the survey will come out in September. I hope you'll look out for it. So those are just a few words, perhaps, to lead us into the next session, and we're really delighted to have Anton Guardia from The Economist here with us today to moderate it. Anton, it's all yours. Thank you.
Thank you.
How are you?
Take a seat. Have a seat, please. Good morning, everybody. It's okay. So thank you very, very much for being here, bright and early. I hope and expect that we'll have a fantastic discussion this morning. My name is Anton Guardia. I work for The Economist. I am the Brussels correspondent here, and I sometimes write the Charlemagne column. We have with us a terrific panel, and we also have headsets because the Prime Minister of Montenegro will be speaking through an interpreter. So make sure your headsets are working, you got them switched on so you can hear what the Prime Minister has to say. If you don't understand what I'm talking, then I'm afraid there's nothing that can be done about that. fascinating sound, hundreds of plastic bags being opened at the same time. It's like being at my children's birthday parties, you know, when they're sort of opening the party bags. You don't get to keep these. So with us today, we have General Philip Breedlove, SACEUR, and we have the Deputy Prime Minister and Defence Minister of Belgium. We have the Prime Minister of Montenegro, and we've got Congressman Mike Turner, who sits on the Armed Services Committee. I'm going to start with one question for me to get us started, and I'm going to try and open it up as soon as I can to the audience, because your questions will be much more interesting than mine. And given that we have the General with us, I'd like to ask you, really sort of give us a 2-minute military briefing, sir. There was a time, as we heard, that there are 400,000 American troops in Europe. There are far fewer than those. So tell us what the sort of, you know, what the order of battle is, as it were, not order of battle, but sort of what the deployment is, how things have changed in recent years, and perhaps, if you can, tell us something about how Russian forces have changed in capability in recent years.
Sure. So I guess the easiest starting point for me will be what I remember from my own personal history. I came to my first European tour in 1983 as a fighter pilot in Spain, and then as I came to continental Europe as working with the 2nd Brigade, 3rd Infantry Division with the Army troops in Germany. At that time, as you've heard, we had a little over 400,000 boots on the ground, not to include some of the other transitory forces and Marine and Navy forces, but actual Army and Air Force boots on the ground. At that time, 2 corps, 4 divisions, and multiple brigades on the ground. At the time, also, just by an order of comparison, about 10 fighter wing equivalents of U.S. forces on the ground. Today, we have 2 brigades. Plus, it's 2 brigades plus, because we have quite an aviation capability in Europe as well. And we have about 2.5 fighter wings of U.S. capability in Europe. So I think that in big numbers, when I talk to our leadership in our country, we've come down about 75% in manning and about 80% in infrastructure in Europe since the days when Phil Breedlove arrived to fight here. I would not want to be a judge of Russian capability, but what I think we can do in recent history is look at the incursion of Russia into Georgia, and maybe take a look at how the incursion of Russia into Crimea has gone. The incursion of Russia into Georgia, by all of you who follow military, was probably not the smoothest. Lots of lessons learned, lots of deficiencies identified, and some capabilities that needed to either be built or very much refined. Large problems in deploying and using air forces, targeting, et cetera, et cetera. By way of comparison, the incursion into Crimea went very much like clockwork, starting with almost a complete disconnection of the Crimean forces from their command and control via cable cuts, jamming, and cyber attacks. And then a complete envelopment by the Russian forces inside of Crimea, albeit they were in green uniforms without patches. We all know exactly what was going on. And that maneuver was done very skillfully, executed on a very precise agenda. And I think what you can draw from your own conclusion then is how far they have come from what did not go well at all in Georgia, but was eventually accomplished, to something that went very, very smoothly in Crimea.
And the fact that it went smoothly tells us about the capabilities, or does it tell us that it was an unopposed entry?
I think it's a little of both. I think it's a little of both. Part of the unopposed may have been it was executed so well that opposition would have been a mess.
Thank you very much. I'm going to jump across to the other side and ask the Congressman a sort of point that really came up last night in one of our conversations, where people were saying, you know, America has to sort of pivot to Asia, pivot to the Middle East, and maybe now pivot to Europe. Is that something that sort of politically we heard a lot about disenchantment on both sides of the Atlantic. What is your sense of the political mood in America about Europe and the degree to which the US should help Europe deal with this crisis?
When you look at the issue of the political will, political mood, I think you have to look to the fact that we have been pursuing a false narrative. Secretary General Rasmussen here this weekend was very eloquent in saying Russia now perceives itself or presenting itself as an adversary. And so the question we have to ask ourselves is not how are we going to change Putin, but how is Putin going to change us? And one of those issues obviously has to be how we're going to look at NATO's responsibility, NATO as an organization that now has Putin redefining that narrative for us in a way where we can look both at the actions of Russia in the past several years in a new light and begin to recommit ourselves to the alliance looking at having adversaries here. Now, the United States is not going to just go pack up a bunch of additional troops and equipment and move it back to Europe. I think also most people are not aware, as the General was describing, the extent of drawdown that has occurred. But there's going to have to be that dialogue, and I think more seriously than it has been in the past several years, of Europe stepping to the plate. How European nations' budgets have been cut in the area of military. What are their responsibilities? How do we partner? And what assets do we make certain that we make available to the General, so that we look to a deterrent effect to Putin, so that, as you just described, there is a sense of both cost and capability on our side if Putin should continue in the manner in which he's going.
The last strategic review talks about reducing the size of the army, investing in special forces, and investing in technology. Is that the right mix for the current situation? It's not the right mix for what Putin is doing and how he's organizing himself and what threat he may now propose. Special forces are certainly important for agility and for quick action, but they're not going to stop anybody who's looking at crossing borders. Thank you. I'd like to ask Pieter Crem, the Belgian defense minister, whether anything has really changed since Robert Gates delivered his scathing speech about European capabilities. I mean, he was full of praise for the number of countries that had participated in Libya, including your own, but also said, the Europeans ran out of bombs, they needed us to backfill for them throughout. It was a sort of long litany of sort of lack of capability that Europeans had. Has that changed, or, as I suspect, has it got worse as a result of the crisis?
Well, Bob Gates held his speech not so far away from here. It was in the Solvay Library. What did we see in that period? It was when we ended the Operation Unified Protector in Libya. Two things. First of all, that some member states of NATO were participating in the operations, and some were not. And I think that is something that is really unbearable for an operation, for an alliance as NATO is one. And that was the first lesson that we learned. Secondly, that not all member states were, or not member states of NATO, of the alliance, were really having all the capabilities to intervene. And there also we saw that the notion of interoperability, of all the means that we can put together in the basket to call upon to serve that famous notion of a collective defense, that not everyone can. Some do not want to, but also can or will be able to participate in a military operation to really defend that, to be ready or able to defend that issue of collective defense. And what I saw at that very time, that some people consider NATO as being an alliance of comfort, but not an alliance of commitment. And I think that the political lesson that we had to learn from that was very important. And so far, of course, there have been budget cuts, and I would like to opt for a new kind of arithmetic within NATO, that it's not only the input that is counting, and not only the budget cuts that are sometimes counted in double digits instead of single digits, but what can one do with the investments that are still done? And are those investments in capabilities, are they done to serve the purpose of interoperability? And I think that is one of the main political issues that we have to overcome, not to say the largest challenge in the upcoming years.
I mean, you've set the challenge. Has there been any progress in addressing either how much you put in or how that money that is available is spent?
I think so. There has been the Connected Forces initiative within NATO, which is a very important initiative that was launched by Secretary General Rasmussen. And then, of course, you have a lot of NATO members that are also a member of the European Union. And you always have that field of tension between the European Union and NATO. But we also saw an evolution in the way how regional conflicts are solved. For instance, in Libya, European member states of NATO were called upon to participate in the action, but we could not do that action without support from our American friends. If we would not have had the possibility to have the air-to-air refueling capabilities that were granted, if we were not able to have the intelligence information that was given or offered by the United States of America, this operation would have lasted for 48 or 72 hours, so to say. And that's also a thing which is very important, lessons learned, and also perhaps in a larger scale, in a projection, NATO has that absolute performance to start a military operation and to end it up. That was a good lesson. Military spoken, Libya was a fair success, 100% achievement. But then there was also the option that other ones, once the military job was over, that other ones would do the other part of the job, which was building society, which was working with organizations to have an economic recovery, and that did not work in Libya. Also a lesson to be taken into account. And if we are in Mali now, this is one of the reasons why we are in Mali and that our French friends took the large responsibility is that we did not cope with the second and the third chapter of the Operation Unified Protector.
Thank you very much. Countries of the Baltics, of Eastern Europe, are very worried. Is it something that you feel able to make a commitment to? Your country receives a lot of Russian tourists, for example. It's a very beautiful coastline. I've seen it myself. How do you? This crisis that is developing for you represents what? Is it something that you want to be involved with? Or are you saying maybe we don't want to come into this alliance quite yet?
I believe
that we should remind everyone who are present here. Montenegro was absolutely adopted the rules and rules of the game in alliance. We ourselves apply Euro-Atlantic standards in our region. We are promoting that in the region, and we took our share of responsibility and commitment for global stability. Montenegro has its mission in ISAF. It also actively participates in numerous other missions, EU and UN, so Montenegro is very well ready to not to just use the benefits from NATO's security concept, but also to take over commitments for global security.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we're going to turn this over to your questions, because I find that one learns as much from the questions as from the answers. There will be up on the board, if you want to post your questions without doing it the old-fashioned way, by raising your hand, but if you want to use technology, you can use your SpotMe devices and questions will pop up. It'll all happen by magic. Although last night we tried to do some of this and it didn't quite work out. So, who would like to ask a question? I've got one here and one there. Thank you. And if I could ask you to be as brief as possible, it'll be polite and courteous to other people who want to ask questions after you.
Great, Andreas Krämer, and it's a follow-on from what you said, is that the invasion of Crimea was prepared by cable cutting, jamming, and cyber attack that you said. That speaks to a high level of engagement by very well-organized forces. Isn't that blowing apart the pretense that it was local militia protecting their population, and speaks to the Russians being involved? Isn't that proof?
Thank you very much. And then Terry had a question back there.
Good morning. General Breedlove, just a month or so ago, I interviewed you and you talked to me about how you were increasing your contacts personally with the Russians. This was just before the Olympics. You were very encouraged. You said that the fact that they were going to ask for help, share plans about Sochi security, was a sign that things were getting better. Do you feel betrayed by this? Would you change your characterization of your new communication outlets with the Russian government? And can you just talk a little bit about where you see things? You're in charge of assets in Europe. What are you going to do? Thanks.
Thank you very much. Let's take one more. There was one gentleman here.
I'd like to ask the panel if it doesn't feel that one of Putin's purposes is to revitalize NATO. There's a nostalgia of a bipolar status that Russia has lost. Not just the purpose, you know, of trying to regain control of old territories, but being the main adversary. Now, I think that is Putin's weak spot, because we are moving towards a multipolar world, and he's already a little bit in trouble with China within the Security Council. And I think this is a point also that should be taken into account by Europe. Europe should not just be absorbed into a sort of Atlantic role which increases the spiral, the bipolar spiral that Putin's strategic aim.
Okay, thank you for that comment. General, would you like to pick up a couple of questions that were directed to you?
Sure. The first answer is very short. I mean, absolutely. There are many, many indicators that directly indicate very deep and strong Russian action in this incursion into Crimea. And I will only caveat that by part of the plan, I believe, was to try to create strategic ambiguity, which, by the way, many in the West and many in the press embraced. No one wanted to really lay down who these men in green and men in black were. We knew who they were all along. But very quickly, Russia began to try to get a local face to the front of it. And some of the actions you've seen of late as they have taken over military bases in Crimea, it's a thin veneer of locals in the front and a lot of men in green right behind as these happen. So I don't think that we should embrace this strategic ambiguity. I think it was a great tool in this disinformation campaign that we were way, way behind as we were enveloped by it. Second, so I stand by the kind of conversations I was having with General Gerasimov before. They were good. Was I being deceived? I can't make that judgment. I don't know when and how his leadership made the decisions that they made, so I would rather not pronounce on that at this moment. I think you heard Secretary Rasmussen say it very clearly earlier. We have been in a stage where we have tried to make a partner of Russia, and we have continued to try to make a partner of Russia, and now it's very clear that Russia is acting much more like an adversary than a partner. I will only add the following, and that is there are lots of examples in history where nations at a political level cannot communicate, and nations at a political level have great strife in their relations. And during those times, sometimes the only line of rational thought is military-to-military communication. I spoke to General Gerasimov just the day after this all happened. I will try to maintain that line of communication. We will insist from each other truth in what we speak. Sometimes we don't see the truth in the same way.
Have you tried since then? Have you tried to speak to him since then?
No, we haven't talked since that day. Have not.
Thank you.
Well, you've already seen that the United States, inside my European command, have moved F-16s forward from Aviano into Poland. You've seen that we've moved F-15s from Lakenheath into the Baltics. You've seen that we have moved some of our naval assets around to make sure that we remain engaged in the Black Sea. There are more things that we are considering. I'd rather not make those public right now.
Thank you very much. Minister, there was a question about how the nature of the response and whether we're feeding the spiral that Putin wants. How do you see it?
Well, could I say something about the question or the remark that was made concerning the paradox of the new bipolar world arriving again, Russia versus the West, or Russia and some partners versus NATO? I think that we learned something from still the most important military operation that we are participating in, which is Afghanistan. And what I saw there is that, in fact, the future will not be a, how could I say, a reinventing that bipolar world, but a multipolar world in which NATO will play a giant role through new partnerships. A lot of positive effects have been learned from Afghanistan, but I see also, for instance, Minister Bildt here in our midst. We also saw that they were, in one way or another, participating as a partner in how could I say, in Afghanistan and in other military operations also. What I saw is that we had the opportunity to meet with, to see through the corridor of Afghanistan that other countries that we so far did not, of course that we knew, but with whom we did not have any deep-going military relations. I'm talking about Australia, I'm talking about New Zealand and some others, through the experience of Afghanistan became partners of us. And I think that a future role of NATO is also developing in this multipolar road. How could I say, the real project of partnerships. And I think once we have a new, how could I say, a new way of participating in Afghanistan, that we should also seek for those new partnerships, and they are also a supplementary challenge for NATO if we want to be also that security provider that we have been since the Second World War, so to say.
How does that thinking apply to the current crisis?
Sorry?
How does your thought about partnership apply to the current crisis?
Well, applying to this current crisis is that first of all we have our own partners within NATO, and that we should really see that we can hold the line with all our partners. So, how could I say, strengthening the partnership in our own house. And then secondly, I'm completely supporting the approach that was made by General Breedlove. I think that we are now in this phase in which we are having a 21st century phenomenon. We want to apply 21st century solutions, but how could I say, the partners with whom we have to talk are applying to 20th century methods, and that keeps on being a very big problem.
Thank you very much.
If I could comment here,
yeah.
Back to the issue of the false narrative. I mean, part of the question was, what is Putin doing? Well, Putin is invading neighbors, annexing territory to his own country, violating standing treaties concerning territorial integrity. The New York Times reports that perhaps he's violating the INF Treaty. We know that he is significantly investing in his military, and both in modernization of his nuclear weapons and his conventional capabilities. All of those do require a response and our reevaluation of what we're doing. I think the Secretary General's comments are very important, and I think certainly General Breedlove's understanding of what we have and what we need to do and what we're now facing is incredibly important for us.
Could I just add to that? I think there's a couple of things that are very worrisome. One of them is more a military issue for Allied Command Operations, SACEUR, to worry about. The other is a little bit more of a policy political issue. For the military side, what I think is worrisome is that Russia has used these series of snap exercises to sort of condition us. And we saw several snap exercises execute in which large formation of forces were brought to readiness and exercised, and then they stood down. And then, as we have all seen, a snap exercise, large formation brought to readiness, and boom, into Crimea we went with a highly ready, highly prepared force. What does that mean for NATO in the future? How do we change our deployment? How do we change our readiness? How do we change our force structure such that we can be ready in the future now to respond to what we know is a tool to bring forces to high readiness, high preparedness, positioned correctly for rapid incursion across a border into a neighboring country? How does that change what we do with force structure and readiness in Europe? That is a military and a policy problem. On the other side, we see what we think, and this is military people thinking, so maybe not as sophisticated, but we think that what we see is a tool now of frozen conflicts being used as a veto to EU and NATO membership. In other words, if Russia is worried about a country moving towards the West, a way to solve that is an incursion, a frozen conflict, and now no one wants to think about bringing that nation aboard into NATO because it might mean conflict with Russia. And I think these two paradigms we have to now think about in our future.
How much do you worry about Transnistria and Moldova while you raise a point of frozen conflicts?
Well, they are clearly already a veto in those areas, and they represent that next place where Russian-speaking people may need to be incorporated.
And you raised the question about how should NATO respond to snap exercises. How has NATO responded to snap exercises we've seen, and what do you think needs to change?
Well, I think that in the past we have seen snap exercises as exercises and national prerogatives of a nation that we expected to respect borders and respect international mores. And now what we see as a snap exercise can be used to do exactly the opposite.
Thank you. Let's open up to the question and we'll come back to the panel. There was one over there at the back, and then there was one over here, and then we'll come to the gentleman over here. And then we'll come to the other side of the room afterwards.
Hello. Yes, my name is Tim Judah. I'm the Balkans correspondent of The Economist, and I have a couple of specific questions for Mr. Djukanovic. Following on a little bit from Anton's train of thought, London is sometimes denigrated as a Londongrad because of the amount of Russian investments in London, which is thought sometimes to restrain perhaps British reaction, especially in this crisis. And likewise, sometimes Montenegro is sometimes called Moscow on sea. It's not just tourists, there's quite a lot of Russian investment, of course, in Montenegro. So I have two specific questions. As an EU candidate country, you're supposed to be aligning your foreign policy with the EU. Will you adopt and apply EU sanctions against Russia? That's the first question. And the second question is, are you coming under any pressure not to pursue your application to join NATO? Is the Russian ambassador, or are you getting calls from Moscow saying, we really don't want you to do this? Thank you.
Let's take that one first, and then we'll come back. Prime Minister.
One of prejudices that's alive and well is the prejudice about what Mr. Judah mentioned, and that is that Montenegro is Moscow on the sea. That's not true. Montenegro is a state that has with its own experience with the application of strict democratic standards, promoted a new model of addressing the issues in the Balkans, and it was the issue of independence and sovereignty. We had a very democratic standard made by, referendum, and became independence. We see our future clearly in the EU and NATO, and we are very confident about that. That Montenegro, unlike any other state in Europe or any other EU country, is not closed for investment. It's open for investments. We have Russian investments, but much fewer than what's been going as the talk of the town, and what Mr. Judah mentioned. Every day that we come closer to the EU membership, the more tourists we see from the EU, the more investors we see from the EU. Some Russian investors now left Montenegro, and their projects went somewhere else, and now we have new investments coming from elsewhere. So I don't see any danger of tourists from Russia and investors from Russia. Up to this moment, we have never had any direct pressure from any side to attempt to actually determine our course or our direction. With Russian counterparts, I was very clear. Montenegro chose its path. Montenegro wants to become a member of the EU and NATO, while at the same time we don't want to mar our or affect our good relations with them. So Montenegro will soon become a member of NATO, and we believe we will have opportunity to give testimony that we are really serious about commitments.
Thank you very much. There was a question here, and then there.
Christoph von Marschall, I'm the chief diplomatic correspondent of the German daily Tagesspiegel. Sorry, I still want to continue or to follow up on the question which Antony asked to the Prime Minister of Montenegro. I think we all understand the cultural ties, the historic ties between Montenegro, not only Montenegro, and Russia. And so I understand it's a very tricky question, which, sorry, I still have the feeling you are evading a little bit. I have a lot of empathy why you are evading it, but when it comes to NATO and when it comes to the situation we are in right now, we all hope that it doesn't come to the situation, but it is absolutely thinkable and possible that in a few months from now, if Russia continues on this path, we have Russian troops in front of NATO troops at one of the borders of NATO. And in this case, Moldova, the Baltics, and so on. So in this case, it is really important that we all know where a future NATO member might stand. Are you willing? And are you willing to tell your citizens and NATO partners that if it comes to such a confrontation, which we hope will not arise, but do you then stand behind Article 5 for Romania? Do you stand behind Article 5 for the Baltic states or not? And again, I understand that this is psychologically very difficult for you to answer, much more difficult than for other NATO states. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And there was a question here. Please, sir.
Just want to frame this question a little bit. Congressman, you heard me yesterday on the subject, so I'm sorry if it's a little repetitive. Listening to the general here, military options appear very limited in the current theater of war. With other words, if Russia decides to move into East Ukraine tomorrow, we will read it as a headline. I'm not sure we're going to be able to do anything about it. There appears to be a somewhat like blood pressure, which they say, can kill you silently. There appears to be a false feeling of security that through surgically imposed sanctions, we can achieve a lot against Russia. I personally believe that a thought process that we can take a template of sanctions imposed on Iran and impose it successfully on Russia will be disastrous. Because Russia is not Iran, it's a large economy, and the interconnectedness of global financial markets could mean that the pain to Europe and America from Russian sanctions is going to be a multiple of what people think it is. But here's my question, Congressman. This is pure hypothetical. Absolutely, it might almost sound absurd, but I just want to focus the mind on this. Assume tomorrow that now that Duma has passed a bill in Russia allowing people access to the Russian Federation, that Mexico announces that it is applying for membership to the Russian Federation, and that there is a possibility that you could have Russian fleets in Cancun and Acapulco on either side of America. What is our reaction function going to be? What can we learn from simulating America's reaction function to that, to what is happening today between Russia and Ukraine?
I've heard of irredentism, but that's a long way away. You had a direct question to you, and then there was a direct question to you. And let me just take Damon Wilson's question here, and then we'll open it up. I'm sorry.
Thank you very much. Damon Wilson with the Atlantic Council. I just wanted to continue the theme. We've heard from you and many others that clearly what's playing out in terms of Putin's strategy is to disrupt NATO and EU enlargement, is to roll back this idea, this vision of a Europe whole, free and at peace. So if we're thinking about a strategic response to what the Russian forces are trying to do in Ukraine, shouldn't there or isn't there more impetus among allied nations to actually think about the credibility of the open door? So I want to ask our colleagues, Congressman Turner, the Belgian Defense Minister, General Breedlove, from your perch, is there a renewed light Georgia?
If I was briefer than usual because I wanted to leave others some space for discussion, and that is I might have left impression that in Montenegro there is a kind of ambiguous attitude or stand. Position about that. Thank you for asking the question. The history of the region is the history of good relations with Russia, and that's without doubt. We are well aware of that, and we are respectful of that. But all the same, I want to tell you with full confidence that we have no dilemma about our strategic prospects. With full awareness of this tradition, of all the problems that we've had through decades and centuries in the Balkans, we are convinced that the good future of Montenegro and all other Western Balkan societies is in the EU and in NATO. And we have no dilemma. I want to remind you, we have took over part of our commitments to promote Euro-Atlantic values and took over our commitments in global actions. So we don't have any dilemma in future for future commitments. Further integration of Europe, further strengthening of Euro-Atlantic partnership is something that we look up to, and we also advocate very cautious and wise policy that General spoke about. We should continue communication, renew partnership with Russia, having in mind the importance of this issue for the stability of Europe and for the future of Euro-Atlantic community.
Congressman, you had a question directed to you about, I suppose it was a really question about encirclement, right? I mean, how would America feel should it be encircled?
Well, if you look at the questions about Mexico and Damon Wilson's question, I'm actually going to combine them because I think that they're more appropriately dealt with together as to what our response here should be and certainly what our response in the future would be. People say that there will not be a military response to Crimea, and I think the answer there is prefaced on that no one's going to take troops to push Russia out. But I think there is going to be a military response. When we hear what General Breedlove is saying, the call for a need for reinvestment in our military capabilities and European military capabilities is very important. But also, as Damon was describing, this issue of NATO. NATO has cooled to enlargement, almost to the point where we've become a bureaucratic process as opposed to the leaning forward organization that helped establish and strengthen democratic institutions. That partnership, I think, has waned. And I think we need to lean forward into it again, recognizing its importance. I think a very appropriate response, in addition to what General Breedlove has been saying, would be to give MAP to Georgia, to put a full diplomatic press on the issue of resolving the conflict between Macedonia and Greece. To look at perhaps, and I see Holbrook's picture here, a Dayton II, if you will, to resolve the constitutional issues of Bosnia-Herzegovina, and looking to, offering membership to Montenegro, so that the issues between the coastline are resolved, and we look at recognizing Montenegro's accomplishments. Those are the types of responses that I think also would have Putin looking at a world that's different than he had wanted or intended, but I think certainly could be an outcome from his consequences.
Thank you very much. Would you like to pick up the point on open door or closed door on NATO?
Well, in fact, I'm very supportive of the approach that was made by Congressman Turner. I think it's the only way that we can really follow. We have the membership action plannings and that set of balances, checks of balances, and I think that we can only follow the track as it was showed here by the Congressman.
So, I mean, at Bucharest, as we know, NATO did not give membership action plan to Georgia and Ukraine. You would give membership action plan to Georgia, and would you ever consider it for Ukraine?
Well, let's say we are working in a situation which has completely changed, and I think that we really have to see how checks and balances, depending on those two cases, are evaluating. And I really have, at this very moment, that we have other problems to deal with.
Okay, thank you very much. Did anyone want to pick up? Do you want to come in on NATO membership?
Well, I actually kind of did not want to, but I will since.
Well, I'll take another question.
I would just say that what we do need to recognize is incredible contributions in a military sense from some of these nations. And as far as a military review of Georgia's participation in Afghanistan, Ukraine's participation in Operation Ocean Shield, and others, these are nations that are clearly meeting the goals that we would set in a military sense for them.
Thank you. We had a couple of questions at this end of the room. Let's come here, gentlemen here, and then there was one there and then one there. Okay.
I'm Jack Janes from Johns Hopkins in Washington. Congressman, the president's going to be here this week, and he's going to give a speech, and I wondered if you could share with us what you think he should say. In some ways, Crimea is a catalyst, but I think that speech is going to be directed as much toward Washington or the rest of the country as it is here, in the sense of saying, what is it that we need to do with our stake in Europe, not just Europe's stake in the United States? And I think you are well aware that there are forces in the Congress in which you work that would say, we don't have a dog in this fight. And I wonder how you would coach the president to use this as an opportunity, also to get beyond some of the trust issues that's also on this agenda for this session, to restore the sense of this being a catalyst to renew a relationship which needs it.
It really does. If you don't mind, two things, relatively quickly. The first is I don't think people see that we don't have a dog in this fight. I wouldn't go that far. I think what you do see in Washington, and specifically in the Congress, is a feeling of the need that Europe needs to stop sending its defense bill to the United States. That it needs to step to the plate as a full partner in defense spending. You know, Russia's economy is approximately the size of Italy, but yet the collective of our EU partners, our European partners, need to certainly look to recapitalizing both in capabilities and in assets, regardless of the United States commitment. And I think you're absolutely right. The president's message is though not just directed at Washington. I think it also needs to be directed here. The president needs to make it clear that he has a commitment to our allies, that our Eastern European allies, people are nervous right now, and they need a president to step up and say, the United States is an avid partner, and we're going to remain one.
Thank you. There were a couple more questions. Here, one there, and then one there. Just go ahead, please.
Thank you very much. My name is Gustav Kressel, Austrian MOD. Sort of following the discussions of the recent days, it's for me it's a bit striking that people don't seem to recognize how the power balances or the balances have shifted after the Cold War. I mean, now there is the funny or tragic situation that Europe, as one of the biggest, as Europe as whole, as one of the biggest world economies, is afraid of the economic repercussions of sanctions against a second-rate economy, totally export-dependent, and having a third-rate banking system. On the other hand, seeing the sort of the scaling down of forces in Europe, compared to the area you have to defend now, and the growth of distance you have to breach with your forces, I think we are, on the other side, totally underestimating the military challenge we have to face. I mean, from Paris to the Baltic is the same distance as from Paris to the Sahel. And if you see how long it takes to deploy forces there and to get there, and considering that any Eastern European scenario would be much more challenging, I think we are afraid of the wrong dogs here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And there was one more over there. Someone had the microphone.
Yeah, here.
Sorry. Yes, please stand up so we can see you.
Nick Fiorenz, Aviation Week's Defense Technology Edition. My question is actually related to the previous question. I mean, both General Breedlove and the Congressman were talking about the drawdown in capabilities. Of course, there are no more Russian forces in Eastern Europe, so one of my questions was about the balance of what used to be called the balance of forces. Also, we've seen a shift in NATO military capabilities from territorial defense to out-of-area operations. So my question really is NATO actually capable of extending the Article 5 guarantee to the Baltic states? Let's say if the Russians decided to step in to defend the rights of, or what they feel are the rights of Russians, ethnic Russians in the Baltic states, and most importantly, I mean, is the nuclear guarantee still credible for countries which are so exposed?
Thank you. You had a couple of military questions there, General, and a political one maybe as well.
Well, the first question to is NATO capable? The answer is absolutely yes. Absolutely yes. It's a matter of national will and the decision of the nations to move forward. And I believe there are those that are trying to describe a problem with our Article 5 commitment. I do not see that. I think the Secretary was very clear that we are committed absolutely to our Article 5. And I do believe that if the nations, if a NATO ally is attacked and Article 5 is invoked, you will see the political will that will put the might to the table. The tougher question is, how do we, it goes back to my first problem that I described a few minutes ago. A SNAP exercise puts an incredible force at a border. The force that is at the Ukrainian border now to the east is very, very sizable and very, very ready. You cannot defend against that if you are not there to defend against it. So I think we need to think about our allies, the positioning of our forces in the alliance, and the readiness of those forces in the alliance, such that we can be there to defend against it if required, especially in the Baltics and other places. Does that answer?
Actually, could you just expand on that? What does that mean? Sorry, I'm here. what does that actually mean? Does it mean moving the NRF into the Baltics? I mean, what are you talking about?
Again, I think what I will try to do is avoid any specifics. But I think the point was made earlier. Moving forces is not a trivial matter. And if you allow your opponent in the name of an exercise to move, position, provision, and prepare, you now are behind where your opponent is. So I think what we need to do, again, as an alliance, is to look at what is it that has changed in this paradigm when we have what used to be a partner now acting more like an adversary who puts this force at ready on our borders. And we have to be positioned differently and be more ready.
And does NATO have the forces at ready, assuming it wants to move them closer?
We have forces that we can put at ready, yes.
Thank you. And there was a political question about whether we're too scared of sanctions. Maybe I'll ask Pieter Crem.
Well, I would like to say something on the political level. On the is NATO capable to respond? Of course, and are we ready? And we are capable for the full 100%. And also on the political level, that is sometimes not enough underscored. We are 100% capable, and also Article 4 and 5 are for that capability the best guarantees. Concerning the sanctions, what I've seen on the sanctions is that the European Union has proposed some sanctions. That those sanctions, how could I say, must help negotiations and talks coming on to have a possible result. What I see is that some people say if this turns out to be not sufficient, that we will have to go in a further direction of new sanctions.
The general wouldn't say precisely what he was thinking of, but I mean the idea that NATO needs to be exercising more closer up to the eastern border, deploying forces preventively, perhaps. I mean, is that something that is feasible within NATO? Would it end up in a long discussion at the NAC every time you wanted to move a brigade?
You take the words right out of my mind. I think that is really something that needs to be discussed at the level of the NAC.
Okay, thank you very much. Yes, a couple more questions on this side.
John Richardson, GMF. It's a question really for the General and for, I think, Minister de Crem. It would take some effort to get considerable NATO forces onto the Ukrainian border with Russia, but a lot less effort to have a big NATO exercise on the border with Kaliningrad. Is that something which you think might give Mr. Putin pause for thought?
Thank you very much. Anybody else on this side? You wanted to ask a question?
Yes, Mia Doornaert, newspaper columnist in Belgium on international affairs. So we heard a lot about the right of smaller countries to decide for themselves where they want to belong to. I fully support that. But when I write my column on that, I think immediately in my mailbox there will be questions, oh yes, and what about the United States and Cuba? I'm not going as far as Mexico becoming member of the Russian Federation, but how free is Cuba to choose whatever it wants to do? How about American sanctions and attitudes towards Cuba? So, Congressman, how would you answer that? And Mr. de Crem, I'm sure you are familiar with that argument from the usual suspects in your commissions. How do you answer that?
Thank you very much. Any more questions? We've got about 6 minutes left, so we're at the Twitter length question. Anybody? 140 characters, one here.
If I can start, Hanna Shellis, National Institute for Strategic Studies, Ukraine. Because you were talking about possible new deployments and developments, and everybody is speaking only about Eastern Ukraine. And I will provoke another question, what about Odessa? And the current developments which we are witnessing in the daily news, that the Transnistria can be really provoked, and the entrance to the one of the biggest Black Sea ports in Odessa. So do you consider that the possibility can be not where you expected, meaning the eastern borders, but it can be much closer to the NATO borders? Because from Odessa to Djukanovic and the Romanian border is just 2 hours driving the car on the very bad road.
Thank you very much. Any other questions? Sorry, was there somebody here? Yeah, please.
Teresa Fallon, European Institute of Asian Studies. I know we're getting very focused on the issue of Crimea, but what about the larger geopolitical questions going on here? And how does China fit into all of this when the bandwidth has taken up so much focus on Russia? And we've seen an intensification of activity in the South China Sea by China. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Anybody else? One more here.
Yeah, my question is for you, sir. How will it affect the budget for the military in the future? Do you see changes? Because apparently there would be some cuts. How does it change the equation?
Thank you very much. And there's one more right at the back there.
It's Keiro Kitagami. I'm from Japan. I had the wonderful pleasure of dealing with the Chinese on the Senkaku issues when I was the advisor to the Prime Minister. And I'd like to follow up on the question. And the United States, you know, compared to the era of the Cold War, it's of course relatively lacking in resources. You have two basically one theater in the east, one theater in the west. Now you have to deal with. The Russians, I think, are pursuing a traditional policy where they're trying to make a buffer zone against the Western countries. But you can't be meddling in, you can't be intervening in each border. Do you think there's going to be a sphere of influence that emerges from this? It's a difficult question, I know, but I can't see.
I'm going to cut you off. You've asked your question. One more here.
Very quick question, Nigar Göksel from Turkey. I'm wondering whether the EU-NATO cooperation blockage is ever more important now, the Turkish block on cooperation between EU and NATO, and whether this brings the Cyprus problem back onto the agenda, whether there'll be more pressure on Turkey or for the resolution of the Cyprus problem in order to be able to adapt.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to ask the panel to be as brief as they can, pick up as many of the questions as they feel they want to respond to. Let's start with you.
I've wrapped together a bunch of these with respect to the budget, and just real quickly, obviously, I think our doctrine and Washington's policy with respect to the Western Hemisphere is established and clear, so I won't reopen that one. But when you look at what are we going to do, what do we need to do, how do we go through this political process? Going back to the issue of the false narrative, what we have to understand is we've been reticent to declare that we have adversaries. I mean, David Hobbs is here from the NATO Parliamentary Assembly, and he can tell you that throughout all the parliaments, there's the debate of do we say that now, you know, it's uncomfortable for us to say that Russia is an adversary or China might be a potential adversary. But I don't think we have to go that far to actually take action. It's not as if we have a lever that's the Cold War and a lever that's saying we have no adversary. There's a smorgasbord in between. And some of that is just declaring that we want to be ready if we have an adversary, if someone chooses to be our adversary. That self-determination of the adversary should, though, be an impetus for us to make certain that we're prepared, that we're invested. And that's what needs to happen in the area of cuts, both in European defense, United States defense. How do we make certain that we're prepared?
Okay, thank you. Prime Minister, I think, well,
I answered that.
He answered? You unsatisfied? Do you want to say more?
I think it's, I mean, you know, it's long-standing doctrine. We don't have to, the United States is not reconsidering its doctrine.
Okay. Thank you. Prime Minister, you didn't get a specific question to you, but on this question of the sanctity of borders and minorities living on, let's say, the wrong side of the border, how does the precedent of Crimea affect the Balkans?
Balkan je ono područje na kojem nije završen posao I toga smo...
The region where the job has not been finished. We mentioned Ambassador Holberg, we mentioned Dayton, we mentioned the crisis in former Yugoslavia, but we are all aware that we still do have certain open issues in the region. Dysfunctional Russia, Macedonia and its frustration on Euro-Atlantic path and unsettled relations between Belgrade and Pristina. Lots of work to be done, but still far in recent history always warned us that the lack of democratic capacities for multi-culture and multi-ethnicity is always a warning. That is why we need to be very sensitive about the stability of that part of Europe. And yes, my response is that even though we see the flaws in modern European architecture, we need to be persistent towards further integrations, and priority should be the Western Balkans. In 2001 and 2014, we got answers to the wrong thesis that the mission of NATO was done there. It is not, and we have to reinforce partnership in the region of Western Balkans, and that is why I believe that the role that Montenegro plays as advocate for that is still very valid, because Western Balkans has not integrated yet, and we believe that NATO will understand it, and we expect and look forward to positive reaction from next summit.
I would make a short remark to Mrs. Dornart's proposals. In fact, I recommend her columns to be read. This is a kind of publicity for her columns. But secondly, Mrs. Dornart, you were talking about the usual suspects. I think we are always entering in an ideological debate, and so far concerning those usual suspects, giving the comments that you mentioned on your columns, I think that so far there's not a majority to leave in our country and within the member states to leave the alliance and its purposes and the means that it has on its counterpart to defend its own interests. And I think as far as we are working in that frame, we have all the guarantees that we will be able to defend ourselves in that magnificent system, which is a transatlantic bond and in a political military very fashionable and very deliverable system. So that's my comment. That's always the same comment that I give on the question that you rose.
And do you have a comment on the question of NATO-EU relations and whether it's going to affect the Turkish question and Cypriot question?
Well, that deserves a debate on its own. I do not see new evolutions coming now right behind from the corner. Let's say we discuss that on another session of the Brussels Forum.
Okay, thank you very much. General, you had a couple of questions about other contingencies, Odessa, Senkaku Islands, and much more.
I will just hit a few of these very quickly. To the issue of Kaliningrad, I will be specific in this regard. I don't think that would be a good idea. I think there are lots of ways that we can position forces, ready forces, and do some increased exercise, move exercises to the left that we had planned in the future that we can use to assure allies and better position ourselves should we need to be better positioned. I think having an exercise on the border of Kaliningrad would be extremely escalatory and probably not helpful. To the point of Odessa and Transnistria, let me just say we are very concerned about that. There is absolutely sufficient force postured on the eastern border of Ukraine to run to Transnistria if the decision was made to do that. And that's very worrisome. So it is clearly, when we talk about threat in the military, we marry capability with intent. We know the capability absolutely exists to do that and cause that problem. We don't know about the intent. What we do see is some of the same rhetoric that was used when they went into Crimea. So if that is the first intention of, indication of intent, then that's very worrisome. The last one that I would talk to may not get to the question that was being answered, but let me just say that I see NATO and EU integration in a military sense very positively. You cannot get a better example of Operation Ocean Shield, of how we bring the military capability, military command and control, logistics trail, depth of military operations that NATO brings, and marries it to the whole of government approach that allows us to connect ashore to policing functions, judicial functions, etc., that brought essentially has brought an end to piracy in Operation Ocean Shield. That's the strength of NATO-EU. It's not about the military power in EU. We have the military power capability in NATO. We need to use the tools that EU has that we don't have to solve those intransigent problems across the full spectrum of governmental approach.
And do you want to pick up that last, we had it a couple of times, on the question of whether what happens in Ukraine is distracting attention or distracting capabilities? Should there be another contingency in Asia? It's not your command, I know.
Yes, it isn't. Clearly the South China Sea is a bit more naval and air-oriented. And right now what we see in Europe is a bit more land-centric. There will be, if we were to have issues in two places at once, there will be competition for these things that we call low-density, high-demand artifacts. The intelligence capabilities, the unique precision capabilities, et cetera, the stealth capabilities that we bring to the fight. So clearly, if there were two issues at the same time, there would be competition for some of those low-density items, meaning we don't have many of them. But these two conflicts are relatively different in their approach. And so I don't see that as the issue.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. We've run out of time. I'd like to thank our panel for an extremely interesting conversation.